even though we started the whole thing over here, like we played here before the Sex Pistols were even sort of, thought of.
Yeah.
And now we've always been there, and people are beginning to realise that now they want more.
The style Mal played, hard rhythm player. Malcolm was a very strong, very confident the way he played. Stevie does the same thing. I mean, we all grew up.
The official story was simple. Bon Scott drank too much, passed out in a car, and never woke up. For decades, that's what the world believed about AC/DC's wild frontman. But the real story of that cold February night in 1980 is filled with holes that don't add up. A friend who vanished years later, a suspiciously quick investigation, missing hours nobody can account for, and evidence that suggests Bon might not have been alone when he died. After 45 years of rumors, the disturbing truth about what happened in that small Renault car is finally coming to light. Ronald Belford Scott was born on July 9, 1946, in a small Scottish town called Forfar. His parents, Chick and Isa, had already lost their first baby, so Bon's birth was a moment of relief and happiness. They lived above a bakery in Kirriemuir, a quiet town surrounded by hills. The place was full of stone buildings and old charm, and that's where Bon spent the first 6 years of his life with his younger brother Derek, born in 1949. These early years in Scotland were calm, full of tradition, and a far cry from the wild life he would one day lead. But in 1952, everything changed. Post-war Britain was tough, jobs were scarce, food was still rationed, and many families, including the Scotts, felt stuck. That year, they packed their bags and took a leap, moving to Australia under a government scheme that offered cheap passage for British families. For just £10 each, they boarded a ship headed for a new life. Thousands of other British families did the same, chasing the promise of sunshine and opportunity. Bon, just 6 at the time, landed in Sunshine, a suburb of Melbourne. It didn't feel like sunshine, though. His strong Scottish accent made him a target at school. Classmates threatened him, mocked the way he talked, and told him to sound more Aussie or get beat up. But Bon didn't back down. He kept speaking his way and turned that stubbornness into pride. That's how he became Bon, short for Bonnie Scott. He made it clear he wasn't going to change for anyone. His family kept growing, too. In 1953, his younger brother Graham was born, and the Scots were settling deeper into their new country. Then came another big move. In 1956, the family relocated to Fremantle, a rough and working-class port city in Western Australia. It was a tougher place, but it felt more real. Bon went to school, joined the local Scots pipe band, and learned to play the drums. He even picked up the fife and recorder. Music gave him something solid to hold on to, but Fremantle also sharpened his edges. By the early 60s, he wasn't just drumming, he was running with gangs. Bon got a name for himself. He was small, but he could fight, and people knew not to mess with him. School didn't last long. By 15, Bon was done with it. He didn't care about classes, and he'd rather listen to Chuck Berry than any teacher. Still, he wasn't lazy. He took on hard jobs: farmhand, crayfisherman, apprentice mechanic. He even got named the best first-year apprentice at one company, surprising everyone. He worked as a postman, bartender, and storeman too. But none of it really mattered to him. It was just something to pay the bills while he chased the only thing he really wanted: to be a singer in a rock band. At the same time, his life on the streets was spiraling. Between 1957 and 1963, Bon led one of the toughest teen gangs in Fremantle. He smoked, drank, fought constantly, and started using drugs. When a friend got roughed up by police, Bon snapped and beat one of them badly. He even got a tattoo that read, "Death before dishonor," across his lower belly, just above the belt line. For a teenager in early 60s Australia, that was bold and dangerous. His body and his behavior were both becoming symbols of rebellion. In 1963, everything caught up to him. At just 16, Bon was arrested for stealing petrol and trying to run from the police. He gave a fake name and was hit with more charges, including one for having sex with an underage girl. The court sent him to Riverbank Juvenile Institution, a maximum security reform school for troubled teens. Life there was brutal. Guards woke the boys at 6 a.m., forced cold showers, and handed out low-quality cigarettes once a week. Fights were constant. Solitary confinement was common, and worse. Many inmates later described it as a place full of abuse and fear. Bon didn't let the place break him. He kept quiet, avoided trouble, and focused on getting out. Music helped. He joined a band with other inmates, and played drums at one performance attended by his parents. He told his mom with a grin, "I'm going to be famous." She thought maybe the whole experience had done him some good. Bon was released just before Christmas. The court dropped the most serious charge and considered the lesson learned. After his release, Bon tried to join the citizen military forces, maybe to get his life back on track, but they rejected him, calling him socially maladjusted. That label didn't bother him. In 1964, Bon Scott was just a kid in Perth with a dream and a drum kit. He helped form a band called The Spectators, sharing the stage with John Collins. They had an unusual setup. Both were drummers and singers, switching spots halfway through the show. Their music was a mix of beat pop and rock and roll, but deep down, they were more into gritty blues. While they covered big names like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, their real passion came through in songs by the Kinks, Them, and the Pretty Things. That raw energy caught people's attention, and in October 1965, they even got to record 4 songs for a local TV show called Club 17. These early tracks, Gloria, On My Mind, Yesterday, and It Ain't Necessarily So, captured a young Bon just starting to find his voice. While all of this was happening on stage, something just as dramatic was unfolding behind the scenes. Bon fell hard for a girl named Maria Van Vlimen. She was 17, blonde, Catholic, and from a well-off family, everything Bon wasn't. They met at the Medina Youth Club, where the Spectres played their first gigs. Maria didn't just become his girlfriend, she became part of the band's world, even running their fan club. But their relationship was complicated. Bon said he wanted to marry a virgin, and Maria was meant to be that person. Meanwhile, she was also dating Brian Gainan, the band's bass player who was only 15. She admitted to holding hands with both of them during shows under a rug but said she didn't go to bed with either. It was a strange setup, and both their families hated it. Maria's parents thought Bon was trash. Bon's parents thought Maria was stuck up. But somehow, it worked for a while. Just like everything else in Bon's early life, it was full of contradictions. That contradiction followed Bon everywhere. On stage, he was a wild man, loud, filthy, unpredictable. Off stage, he could be quiet, sweet, and deeply thoughtful. Angus Young once called him the dirtiest I know. And yeah, Bon had that side, but with Maria, he was different. He didn't drink, he didn't swear. They went to church together. Every day, he'd dress up just to have lunch with her during his work break. On weekends, they'd go watch bands or eat fish and chips by the water. In late 1966, everything shifted again. The Spectres merged with another local band, the Winstons, to form the Valentines. It was a power move that worked. With Bon Scott and Vince Lovegrove as co-lead singers, the Valentines became one of the hottest bands in Perth. They were young, good-looking, and confident. They even had rules: no girlfriends at gigs. Maria hated it. Bon tried to go along with it, but Maria kept showing up, furious at both Bon and Lovegrove for the rule. Still, the band kept rising. The Valentines hit the Perth charts with a cover of Every Day I Have to Cry and soon moved to Melbourne to chase bigger stages. That move changed everything. They started working with Harry Vanda and George Young from the Easy Beats, who wrote catchy songs tailor-made for their double vocal setup. By 1969, they had a national hit with Juliet and another with My Old Man's a Groovy Old Man. The bubblegum pop sound worked, especially with young girls who couldn't get enough of their energy and charm. They toured with some of the biggest names in Australian music, including Russell Morris and Johnny Farnham, and were even featured in a major tour called Operation Starlift. But just as things were peaking, trouble hit. In September 1969, police raided the band's rehearsal space at a surf club in John Duke, Victoria. They'd been watching for weeks, tipped off by a jealous rival. That night, officers found a pipe and some Moroccan marijuana powder. It was Australia's first major drug bust involving a rock band, and it made national headlines. The magazine Go-Set wrote that the pop world rocked after the news broke. Each band member was fined $150 and put on a good behavior bond. But behind the scenes, the story ran deeper. According to the band's roadie, they were already experimenting with harder substances. Even after agreeing to stop using marijuana, Bon, drummer Paddy Beach, and the roadie himself just kept going like nothing happened. Bon didn't just shrug it off, he leaned into it. Instead of hiding, he started speaking out about marijuana and calling for its legalization. In 1969 Australia, that was a bold move. The country was politically tense, with the Vietnam War in full swing, and conservative leaders were cracking down on youth culture. But Bon didn't care. He told reporters that the government's drug policies were outdated. Even more shocking for the time, he also showed support for gay rights, something no other rocker was doing publicly in that era. For Bon, it wasn't just about music. He believed in pushing back against authority, and his outspokenness hinted at the rebellious persona he'd later bring to AC/DC. By 1970, things were falling apart. The band was split over its direction. Some wanted to shift toward rock, others wanted to stick with the successful pop formula. The drug bust had caused a divide too. Some tried to stay clean, others, like Bon, didn't bother. Their roadie remembered how it went, Bon, Paddy, and he kept partying while others tried to follow the rules, at least for a while. That split broke the band's rhythm. Even though fans still loved them, especially back in Perth, the group couldn't hold together. In August 1970, the Valentines quietly broke up. After his band the Valentines fell apart in 1970 due to a drug scandal, Bon Scott made a bold move. He left behind the pop music scene and headed to Adelaide, where he joined a band called Fraternity. This group wasn't mainstream. They were into progressive rock, mixing psychedelic sounds with blues and boogie. It was a new world for Bon. He wasn't just a wild frontman anymore. In Fraternity, he had room to grow. He began to shape the unique voice and stage style that would later make him famous. They released 2 albums, Livestock and Flaming Gala, and became one of Australia's most respected rock bands. For almost 3 years, Bon stayed committed to this group, working with talented musicians like Bruce Howe, Mick Jidd, John Bissett, and Tony Bettle. It was the most stable period in his career up to that point. It was also during these years that Bon's personal life took a sharp turn. At a Fraternity gig in 1971, he met Irene Thornton. Things moved fast. They got married in January 1972. Irene was a secretary, steady and grounded, the opposite of Bon's chaotic world. Their relationship was passionate but volatile. Friends said they'd argue like fire and make up just as hard. But by late 1973, things started falling apart. Fraternity's UK tour had flopped. Money was tight. Bon was drinking more and cheating often. Their small apartment in Adelaide turned into a war zone. One night, after a brutal fight, Bon jumped on his motorbike and sped off drunk. That moment hinted at the disaster that was just around the corner. By mid-1974, Fraternity had broken up and Bon's marriage was in ruins. He was broke, aimless, and spiraling. Fraternity's UK tour was supposed to be their big break. They even changed their name to Fawn to appeal to European audiences. But when they arrived in the UK in 1973, reality hit them hard. No one knew who they were. At one show in Bournemouth, they opened for Status Quo. Bon and the guys showed up in their bus, laughing at the headliners for looking like fashion models. But when Quo took the stage, dressed down in denim and blasting through their set with a pro-level sound system, Fraternity got crushed. It wasn't just one bad gig, it kept happening. On May 3, 1974, everything nearly came to an end. That night, Bon showed up drunk to a Mount Lofty Rangers rehearsal. The band wasn't like Fraternity. It was more of a loose collective of musicians. Bon was already fired up from a fight with Irene earlier that day. He got into it with Bruce Howe again. They had fought before. No one remembers exactly what set Bon off, but he stormed out, slamming into the door a few times before finally leaving. Peter Head, the band's keyboardist, begged him not to go. "You're too drunk to drive," he warned. Bon didn't listen. He smashed a bottle of Jack Daniels, jumped on his Suzuki GT550, and disappeared into the night. Minutes later, disaster struck. At an intersection in West Cutton, Adelaide, Bon crashed head-on into a 1950s FC Holden. The car was driven by 17-year-old Lee Morgan, who was out with 3 friends. The rain was coming down, the lighting was poor, and Bon's motorcycle headlights were barely visible. The impact was brutal. Bon flew through the windshield. The car and the bike were totaled. Lee Morgan, who later became a respected community leader, never forgot that night. The aftermath, it changed the course of his life. The next morning, headlines in the Sunday Mail revealed the biker's identity: Bon Scott from fraternity. Bon was in a coma for 3 days. No one knew if he'd make it. When friends were finally allowed to visit, they were horrified. His face was a mess, he had lost all his teeth, his body was covered in bruises and cuts, and he was unrecognizable. Peter Head said he looked terrible. Bon stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks. The accident was so bad that when George Young later heard Bon's name suggested for AC/DC, he scoffed, saying there was no way someone that badly hurt could perform. The truth was Bon's short time with Mount Lofty Rangers was over. He had only played 12 gigs and recorded 2 songs with them, songs that wouldn't even be released until decades later. That crash didn't just break his bones, it broke his life in half. Everything he had known, his band, his marriage, his routine, was gone. During recovery, he had to take odd jobs just to get by. He was mowing lawns, painting walls, doing whatever he could. He was 27 and scared. He thought he was too old to make it in music. He needed a fresh start. By October 1974, Bon packed up and left Adelaide for good. He moved to Sydney, leaving behind the ghosts of fraternity and the wreckage of the Rangers. He was ready for something new, even if he didn't know what that was yet. It was an old friend who gave him that second chance. Vince Lovegrove, Bon's former bandmate from the Valentines, had started a small management company with his wife. When he saw Bon struggling, he brought him in to help around the office, small jobs, just to keep him afloat. Then one day, Vince got a call. George Young was looking for a new singer for his brother's band, AC/DC. Their frontman Dave Evans was out. Vince immediately thought of Bon. George hesitated. Bon was older, he had been in a bad accident. But Vince pushed. He took Bon to see AC/DC play at the Piraka Hotel. Bon was impressed but unsure. They looked young, maybe too young to handle real rock. Meanwhile, the Young brothers thought Bon was too old to rock. That all changed one night during a jam session at Bruce House Place. They played all night. The chemistry was instant. Something clicked. On October 24, 1974, less than 6 months after nearly dying in a crash, Bon Scott officially joined AC/DC. From that moment on, rock history was never the same. Their first album High Voltage hit the top 20 in Australia in early 1975. Their second, TNT, went even further, reaching number 2. Songs like It's a Long Way to the Top and Jailbreak became anthems. Then, with perfect timing, their manager sent tapes and photos to contacts in London. Atlantic Records executive Phil Carson heard them and offered a global record deal. That deal changed everything. By 1976, AC/DC was touring Europe, opening for the biggest bands in the world: Black Sabbath, Kiss, Aerosmith, and The Who. Their international version of High Voltage sold over 3 million copies, pushing them far beyond the Australian scene and straight into the global spotlight. In 1979, the band took their biggest risk yet. Atlantic wanted a hit, so they brought in producer Robert John "Mutt" Lang. It was the first time the band worked without George Young, Malcolm and Angus' older brother. They recorded Highway to Hell in London over just 3 weeks. Bon Scott's death. When it was released in July, it exploded. It became their first million seller in the United States, reaching number 17 on the Billboard charts. Over time, it would sell more than 8 million copies and become one of the most legendary rock albums ever made. For Bon Scott, Highway to Hell was both his greatest achievement and his final album. He had finally made it, his voice was everywhere, his name was known, and his band was flying high. Bon Scott's final weeks were a blur of music, parties, and chaos. He had just finished the Highway to Hell tour with AC/DC, wrapping up the last show on January 27, 1980, in Southampton. Not long after, he appeared on Top of the Pops and began working on early material for what would become Back in Black. During this time, he was spending a lot of nights out in London. The Music Machine Club in Camden was one of his favorite spots. He was often seen drinking heavily and socializing with a mix of friends, musicians, and drug users. On the night of February 18th, Scott was back at the Music Machine. He drank with friends, including Alastair Kinnear, a musician with ties to heroin. According to Kinnear's later account, Scott was too drunk to function, so Kinnear put him in his small Renault 5 car around midnight. When he couldn't wake him up, he called Scott's ex-girlfriend Silver Smith. She reportedly told him to just let Scott sleep it off. Kinnear said he laid the seat back, left Scott in the car, and returned the next morning, but Scott was cold, unresponsive, and already gone. He was pronounced dead at King's College Hospital with signs of rigor mortis showing he had died hours before. The coroner's report ruled the cause of death as acute alcohol poisoning. His blood alcohol level was 0.41%, over 5 times the legal driving limit. The report also mentioned that he had choked on his own vomit while passed out in a reclined seat. A dislodged dental plate might have made the choking worse. No heroin or other drugs were found in his system, but some experts later pointed out the tests used back then weren't advanced. Heroin breaks down quickly in the body, and in 1980 the difference between morphine and other opiates wasn't always clear in toxicology reports. There were also questions about how quickly the investigation was wrapped up, within 72 hours, without checking for other substances. Some people close to Scott mentioned that he had previously overdosed on heroin in 1974 and 1978. This raised the possibility that his body might have still been vulnerable to drugs even if traces weren't obvious. Not everyone agrees with the official story. Some believe that alcohol alone didn't kill him. For one, AC/DC drummer Colin Burgess said Scott didn't seem that drunk the last time he saw him. Others argue that Scott's liver was already damaged from years of heavy drinking, which made him more fragile. Still, it's strange for someone like Scott, who had a high alcohol tolerance, to suddenly die from it, unless something else was involved. That's where the heroin theory comes in. Jesse Fink's book The Last Highway suggests that Scott may have been given heroin the night he died. Fink points out that Scott was surrounded by users, including Kinnear and UFO's Pete Way. People who saw Scott that night said he looked sluggish and had tiny pupils, both signs of heroin use. Some even claimed that Kinnear gave him heroin. But there's no solid proof of that, and AC/DC has strongly denied any drug-related cover-up. Then there's the theory of foul play. Some fans think Scott was murdered or at least left to die on purpose. Kinnear later disappeared mysteriously while sailing off the coast of France in 2006. That only fueled rumors that he was hiding something, or had been silenced. Other conspiracy theories claim there were tensions within AC/DC and that the band might have been frustrated with Scott's behavior. But again, these are mostly speculation. There's no real evidence pointing to murder or a cover-up. There's no denying that Scott's lifestyle played a role in his death. His autopsy revealed serious liver damage from years of drinking. He also had dental issues from an old motorcycle crash, which made it easier for vomit to get stuck in his throat if he passed out. London's music scene at the time was flooded with heroin, and Scott was surrounded by people who used it. Even if he wasn't using it that night, being in that environment made it risky. After Bon Scott died suddenly in early 1980, the rest of AC/DC were completely shaken. Angus and Malcolm Young, Cliff Williams, and Phil Rudd didn't know what to do. They were in shock. Some of them thought it might be the end of the band. Bon wasn't just their frontman, he was their friend, their energy, and their voice. Without him, it didn't seem right to go on. They seriously considered walking away from it all. But then something unexpected gave them strength. Bon's family, especially his parents, told them that he would have wanted the band to keep going. That simple message changed everything. It was the push they needed. Around that same time, they remembered something Bon had said before he passed. He had talked about a singer named Brian Johnson from a band called Geordie. Bon had liked him. He even told friends that Johnson reminded him of Little Richard and that he truly knew what rock and roll was all about. It was almost as if Bon had unknowingly picked his own replacement. Just 2 months after Bon's death, AC/DC brought Brian Johnson into the band. They didn't waste any time. In April 1980, they flew to the Bahamas and started working on a new album with producer Robert John "Mutt" Lang. Johnson admitted later that he was nervous. He had no idea how big this would get. He just gave it everything he had. On July 25, 1980, they released Back in Black. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a global explosion. The album cover was plain black, a tribute to Bon, but the music inside was anything but quiet. People around the world connected with it. The album hit number 1 in the UK and number 4 in the United States. It was so popular that it sent AC/DC's older albums back into the charts. No one had done that since the Beatles. Over time, Back in Black became a monster. In the United States, it went 27 times multi-platinum. It became the third best-selling album in American history, just behind Thriller by Michael Jackson and Their Greatest Hits by the Eagles. Around the world, it sold an estimated 50 million copies, second only to Thriller. And it never even hit number 1 in America, but it stayed in the top 10 for more than 5 months. Some fans believe that Bon had a hand in the lyrics, especially for songs like You Shook Me All Night Long, though that's never been proven. Bon Scott didn't live to see it, but the world didn't forget him. In 2003, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with AC/DC. His nephews were there to accept the honor. In 2004, Classic Rock magazine named him the greatest frontman of all time, above even Freddie Mercury and Robert Plant. 2 years later, Hit Parader ranked him among the top 5 heavy metal vocalists ever. His songs lived on too. Highway to Hell, which he co-wrote, landed on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. The album itself made the magazine's top albums list. And his memory stretched far beyond English-speaking countries. A French band wrote a tribute song, so did a German hard rock group, and even a Romanian band. Everyone felt the loss. In 2012, the album Back in Black was added to the Grammy Hall of Fame. It was one more way of keeping Bon's spirit alive through the very music the band created in his honor.